Sairam everybody, Sairam. It gives me a great pleasure to start the proceedings, and before I start, my humble pranams at the lotus feet of Bhagavan. The topic that I am going to talk today, of course, is my favorite subject, diabetes. Here I am going to focus on diabetes in the young. What I plan to tell you is diabetes is not just hyperglycemia. There are so many conditions that are masked in the title called diabetes, and I am going to share with you what those conditions are if the diabetes were to happen in the young individual. So it's going to be about making precision diagnosis, because if you know exactly what the problem is, you will know exactly what kind of treatment you should give. Just because you see somebody having hyperglycemia, it doesn't mean you should give oral tablets immediately or insulin immediately. Many of these conditions, you have to give specific treatment. And in some conditions, you will know oral tablets are not at all useful. And some conditions, you will know that insulin is not the best choice. So let's go through and see what are all those different types of diabetes, which many of you would not have even heard that so many varieties exist. So the talk is going to be about the diabetes in the young, how a precision medicine is important in making the correct diagnosis and offering correct treatment. So here are the various categories of diabetes that you can see that occurs in the young individual. Next slide, please. So here, type 1 diabetes is the predominant one that occurs in children, but it can also occur in the adults. Nearly 80% of diabetes occurring in children are of this type, where there is an immunological derangement that is causing the disease. It's also possible for type 1 diabetes to happen in the older individuals, but predominantly it is less in frequency in older individuals. So it's an autoimmune form of diabetes, and there is another autoimmune form of diabetes that occurs in the older individual, which is called as the latent autoimmune diabetes in the young. But there are occasions where diabetes can happen as a disease that is coexisting with other problems. One of them is called polyendocrine autoimmunity. Here there are several endocrine organs that are affected, out of which the insulin producing beta cells is one of them. Then there are special forms of diabetes which are predominantly restricted to certain geographical areas in the world. One of them is called fulminant diabetes, which is predominantly present in East Asia and Southeast Asia. It was first discovered in Japan, and it is got a completely different, completely strange presentation. Unless you know fulminant diabetes, you will not be able to pick it up and identify it as fulminant diabetes. So the knowledge of the disease is very important here. But there is a form of diabetes called maturity onset diabetes in the young. This diabetes occurs in the younger individual, but it is clearly due to a genetic defect. It is a single gene disorder. And if this gene is defective, diabetes becomes manifest. So in this particular case, you need to really measure the kind of treatment you want to give. Then of course, there is a condition called malnutrition modulated diabetes, where during the growth of the child, certain aspects of the nutrition, predominantly amino acids, are deprived in these individuals, leading to changes in the way the pancreas is developing. So in this occasion, they are not undernourished, and of course they are not overnourished. And if you were to look at them, it is like they will have a pot belly, but will have absolute impoverishment on the upper body and prosperity in the central body, and of course they will have thin legs and of course no muscle mass. So each of them have a peculiar presentation. But there is a form of diabetes that is inherited only from the mother. It's called maternally inherited diabetes, where the defect is in the genes present inside the mitochondria. Mitochondria is very important for energy metabolism in the cell. If there are any defects in the mitochondria, of course the energy metabolism is deranged. That leads to diabetes. But if you take a clear history of diabetes in the patients, and if you clearly document that it is maternally inherited, you should start suspecting this is a bit of a strange form of diabetes. And some of the patients who have maternally inherited diabetes also have deafness. So this is something that you'll have to put together. Lack of knowledge will allow you to treat it as type 1 diabetes, which is the commonly made mistake. And of course, the treatment is completely wrong. Then of course, many of you would not know you can have diabetes in newborn babies. This is called neonatal diabetes. And I'll tell you a few words about what neonatal diabetes is. But in the way we are living nowadays, with the changes in the lifestyle, you realize that whatever the problem the adult faces in terms of obesity, in terms of physical inactivity, is all filtering down to children. We expect children to be playful, energetic, running around, spending a lot of calories. But these are the children who are couch potatoes, don't move. The only thing that they do when they are playing is to move their fingers in order to play video games. So in this group of children, they are obese and they are physically inactive. And of course, their dietary patterns are completely abnormal because they are all fond of fast foods. And in this group of children, you will have type 2 diabetes occurring in children, which never existed, say 20 years ago. It's very, very rare. Nowadays, 5 to 10% of children developing diabetes happens to be type 2 diabetes in the young. This is a disastrous situation mainly because if you have diabetes for say 20 years or 30 years, all your major organs are going to be affected because of hyperglycemia. Your kidney will be gone, your eyes will be gone, you'll have retinopathy, your cardiac problems will start because the vessels that are affected, blood vessels that are affected are going there in every part of the body. If somebody who is 15 develop diabetes, by the time they are 35, which is in their prime of their life, they will become economically unproductive. They will probably be having a coronary artery disease or a stroke or so many different problems at this particular age group. So it's got serious consequences in terms of the nation actually, because they are all unproductive individuals. And the family is not really going to be very helpful because they'll have to maintain this guy. And he is going to be more expensive to maintain than some of these children born abroad nowadays. Next slide, please. So if you look at this particular cartoon, the size of the circle tells you the breadth of the disease. In the age group of 15 to 30, that is the group where you can make a big mistake in terms of making the right diagnosis. Type 1 diabetes is the predominant one that is signified by a larger circle. Type 2 diabetes circle is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Hopefully when I show this picture 5 years later, the type 2 diabetes circle would have swollen much more than what it is. But if there are interfaces between these circles, it's also possible for someone to have type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes because both are genetic background. Both can affect in the same individual. That group of people right now is very small, but it's possible. So the malnutrition modulated diabetes, as I told you, is due to certain defects in the nutritional uptake in these children. And these are children who are coming predominantly from an impoverished background, where the lentils that they eat probably do not have the right kind of proteins, because they are the ones who go to public health, public distribution system to buy their food, and they don't get the top quality food. So they end up eating lentils that are second quality or third quality that may not have all the nutritional amino acids that are needed. So of course the circle that is completely outside is the MODY. Here the MODY is spelled as MODY. Please don't confuse. It's called maturity onset diabetes in the young. So I don't think it has any relevance to our Prime Minister. So you have genetic syndromes that are all important in here. So when you look at this particular disease, what is the age group in which these diseases peak? It is clearly shown here. For instance, the one that is, next slide please. The one that is seen in the green is the type 1 diabetes that predominantly peaks in the age group of 15. The one that is shown in the blue is the malnutrition modulated diabetes that peaks little later. The type 2 diabetes of course peaks much later at the age group of 50 or 55. And the maternally inherited diabetes in the young peaks little early, maybe in the 30 age group. So there is quite a number of ways by which we can identify. But with the way the changes in the lifestyle, certain things get so merged, it is difficult for us to identify what exactly is the diagnosis. This is where you should not just go by blood glucose. Blood glucose is a warning that something is wrong with the metabolism. But if you need to go and check what is the actual defect, then your therapeutic choices completely change, and that is probably what I'm going to show you in the end of my presentation. So let's look at the type 1 diabetes. Next slide. Next slide. So type 1 diabetes is predominantly occurring in younger age group, and the way by which we can identify is the presence of autoantibodies to certain autoantigens called glutamic acid decarboxylase, isoform 65, islet antigen 2, which is tyrosine phosphatase. So these antibodies are diagnostic of the disease. So measuring these antibodies clearly tells you there is an autoimmune destruction of the pancreatic beta cells taking place. And there is complete destruction of the pancreatic beta cells. So there is zero insulin produced, which means their insulin requirement have to be replaced from external source. And C-peptide is a protein that is secreted from the beta cells, one protein secreted with every molecule of insulin that is secreted. So C-peptide is an indirect measurement of the amount of insulin that is secreted. So if you cannot detect C-peptide in the peripheral blood, that means these people is a clear indication. So C-peptide is an indirect measurement of insulin secretion from the beta cells. HbA1c is a measurement, hemoglobin A1c, that tells you how long you have had abnormal blood glucose. Since the red blood cells have a lifespan of 120 days, the HbA1c will reflect the abnormality in your glucose metabolism in the last 120 days. So if patients comes and tell you, sir, I've been following all your advice, I'm eating very less, and the HbA1c will reveal whether that guy is telling the truth or giving faking stories. But actual cause of the disease is the autoreactive T cells that goes and destroys the insulin producing beta cells. There have been some evidences to show the innate immunity cell called natural killer cell is also involved in the beta cell destruction. So there is a lot of immunological events that take place, and collectively the end damage to the beta cell is mediated by the T cells. So if you regulate the T cells, it's possible to protect the beta cells. So that is how the intervention or therapy for type 1 diabetes is focused. Next slide, please. So when you look at the prevalence of these autoantibodies in newly diagnosed type 1 diabetes across the world in different populations, you will see that certain antibodies is not representative in all the patients. It's present in 80%, it's present in 75%, etc. But if you combine the antibodies, say if you ask the question, how many of the people have either GAD antibody or IA2 antibody or insulin autoantibody called as IAA, you will realize that you can pick up more patients. But still 92% of the patients with type 1 diabetes can be accounted for with one of these autoantibodies. Meaning that there are again 8% of patients who are autoantibody negative, which means we still do not know what are the autoantigens that are triggering the disease in these individuals. So this is something very interesting. This was the paper that I published in 1999. Here, the number of patients we took was all the patients who developed diabetes in the age group of 0 to 15 and 15 to 35 throughout Sweden were taken into the study. And we knew exactly which street these patients are coming from so that we could get a healthy control from the same street, from the same geographical environment, breathing the same air as a control. So we were able to collect two controls, healthy controls for every patient. And we were able to identify the genetic markers associated with diabetes. And it is called the HLA-DQ2 and DQ8. The HLA-DQ2 and DQ8, if it is present, the risk for type 1 diabetes is 60 times in the age group of 0 to 5. And slowly over the period of different age, the risk conferred by this particular gene keeps falling. Whereas a particular gene called DQ6 is highly protective. if any child carries that particular gene, they will not get diabetes. But it is 100% protective in the age group of 0 to 10, whereas the protective effect slowly wanes with increasing age. So this graph tells you how the risk conferred is also age dependent. Next slide, please. So this is the disease called autoimmune diabetes in the adults, which is nothing but type 1 diabetes occurring predominantly in the adults. Next slide, please. And here it is clearly a subgroup. I mean, there is so much terminology because confusion in the terminology because it occurs in the later age group when the patient goes to a doctor and they do not have serious symptoms. The doctor tends to misdiagnose as type 2 diabetes because not many places they have the possibility to measure GAD antibody or IA2 antibody. So this is clearly a subgroup of patients that gets clinically diagnosed as type 2 diabetes who are greater than 35 years of age. So when a lot of epidemiological studies were done, then they felt that 35 years is higher cutoff, so we could drop the cutoff to 30 years. So this kind of patients were diagnosed throughout the world. But of course, nobody has consensus on what we should call it. So Australians called it as LADA. The Japanese call it as slowly progressive insulin dependent diabetes. And the rest of the world called it as latent type 1 diabetes. And of course, the Americans called it as type 1.5 diabetes. So they always have their own terminology and they'll never agree to the terminologies the rest of the world. But of course, people in India, the doctors in India called insulin requiring diabetes because they treated them as type 2 diabetes. They gave them tablets. None of the tablets worked. So slowly they started replacing insulin. And after a period of 3-4 years, they are on insulin. So they thought this is the better terminology. But if you knew the problem right at the beginning, you could have saved the beta cells. You could have kept them on insulin so that they will not develop the serious complication of coma, diabetic coma, that commonly occurs in these individuals. So the term insulin requiring diabetes is clearly a term that had been derived due to trial and error. Next slide, please. So in order to diagnose LADA or latent autoimmune diabetes in adults, the Immunology of Diabetes Society, for which I was the secretary for more than 8 years, gave an operational age cutoff at 30 years. Then these patients should have one of the autoantibodies present, either GAD or IA2 antibody, but they should be free from insulin treatment at least 6 months from the time of diagnosis. So this is called insulin independence. If these 3 criteria are met, then it's possible to call them LADA. As you call them LADA, once you make the diagnosis, it becomes clear that there is only one treatment you can offer them, which is insulin. You cannot go and give them tablets, which would normally be the case if you do not measure the autoantibodies in these individuals. Next slide, please. So this is a paper that was published in Diabetic Medicine, where they had done a follow-up study over a period of 25-30 years on all patients clinically diagnosed as type 2 diabetes. And it turned out that many of these patients over a period of 10 years or 15 years later could be treated only with insulin. So they had samples collected right from time 0, 5 years later, 10 years later, 15 years later, all the duration. And when they checked the sample 0, all of them who were on insulin at 10 years later all had autoantibodies. So this constituted at least 11% of patients diagnosed as type 2 diabetes were actually autoimmune diabetes. If only this was detected earlier, they could have been treated with insulin right at time 0, not 10 years later, because during this period, they would have completely exhausted the beta cell. It is like saying this, your beta cell is sick and your sick beta cell can secrete small amount of insulin. Okay. Now, if you beat the sick horse, it cannot run, it will die faster. If you give drugs that will promote insulin secretion, you are asking sick person to run a marathon. So it doesn't work. So they die faster. So this is an accelerated death that happens for the beta cell. Next slide, please. So when you look at the prevalence of patients with GAD antibodies amongst type 2 diabetic patients across the world. So these are patients from different parts of the world, including China, where they clearly show at least 10 to 12% of patients across different populations get misdiagnosed as type 2 diabetes when they are actually latent autoimmune diabetes in the adults. Next slide, please. So when you look at this autoimmune diabetes spectrum, type 1 diabetes occurs in children where the genetic contribution is high, age is young, they have multiple autoantibody positivity with small amount of T cells, and insulin is the major treatment choice. Whereas if you take LADA at the bottom of the spectrum, you will realize that the genetic contribution is much lesser, the age is much bigger, the multiple autoantibodies is not multiple, maybe one or two, and the C-peptide is much better than those with type 1 diabetes, and insulin treatment you can start little later. So this is the spectrum of autoimmune diabetes. Next slide, please. Now, this is a condition called polyendocrine autoimmunity, and in this condition, you also have diabetes. If you don't go and check for other endocrine organs and treat only diabetes, that's not the best treatment that you can provide. Next slide, please. So there is a syndrome called autoimmune polyendocrine syndrome 1 called APS1. Then you have APS2. Then you have immunodeficiency, polyendocrinopathy, and enteropathy, X-linked. So it's called IPEX. So in each of these conditions, diabetes is frequently present. But the problem is somewhere else. And diabetes happens because the beta cells are involved. Whereas in the APS1, if you see, the percentage of APS1 patients developing autoimmune diabetes is 2 to 30%. The percentage of APS2 patients developing autoimmune diabetes is 40 to 50%. And of course, those who are diagnosed as IPEX, 80% of them have autoimmune diabetes. So it depends on what is the symptom that presents in these individuals for the first time. If diabetes is the one that comes up first, and if you miss other things, you will end up treating diabetes and they would end up having serious complications due to other organ failure that has happened, which is like celiac disease or pernicious anemia. There are so many different conditions that get called as APS1 or APS2. So identifying other diseases coexisting with type 1 diabetes is important because some of them share the common pathway for the disease development. Next slide, please. So some of the studies that we did in collaboration, the first one was the collaboration I had with the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, New Delhi, where we measured the thyroid autoimmunity in North Indian patients. And in those patients with thyroid autoimmunity, the diabetes autoimmunity, which is identified by GAR antibody positivity, is 13.8%. And tissue transglutaminase, which is the celiac disease that happens in those individuals where you have malabsorption syndrome, is 7.4%. So thyroid autoimmunity is coexisting with other autoimmune disorders. So if you don't check that, you're not treating the entire patient for all the organ damage that's happening. So we did a nationwide study on patients with rheumatoid arthritis. The problem here is that rheumatoid arthritis occurs in older individuals. The average age is 40 to 45 years. But when we checked all these rheumatoid arthritis patients collected from whole of Sweden with matched controls, we were able to show for the first time that 4.2% of RA patients had GAR antibody positivity, 7.4% of RA patients had IA2 antibody positivity. And there is one other autoantigen called zinc transporter T8, and 5% almost of those RA patients had zinc transporter antibodies, clearly showing that these antibodies are relevant, or type 1 diabetes is also coexisting in patients with RA. But it's interesting for us to note that all these autoantibody positive RA patients were all occurring in RA patients who had RA antibody called APA. So it's anti-citrullinated antibody. So there is a clear lineage on APA positive patients happen to have predominantly autoimmunity to type 1 diabetes patients. Next slide, please. So celiac disease is the other disease, and tissue transglutaminase antigen is the culprit. So antibodies to the tissue transglutaminase antigen is the cause of celiac disease, and the cause is basically allergy. Allergy to gluten. That's where you really see that gluten-free food is present in so many places because this has become a common problem. There is a genetic defect. then you have autoimmunity to tissue transglutaminase, and this is lining the intestinal wall, and suddenly all the villus architecture of the intestinal wall disappears. Villus architecture is important because it increases the surface area so that absorption can happen much better with a larger surface area. All this villus atrophy happens, and you have like a pipe. That means absorption surface becomes decreased, and the digestion is not really optimal. With the result, there is an ulceration of the intestine, and this ulceration can happen anywhere between mouth to the anus. All this is covered by mucosal epithelium. So suddenly, if somebody comes with oral ulcers, you need to check on celiac disease also, because they might have malabsorption syndrome also coexisting. But if you look at the patients with celiac disease, 10% of the celiac disease patients have type 1 diabetes. And they are all having tissue transglutaminase antibodies. And one of the common HLA that is associated with celiac disease is DQ2, which is also susceptible for diabetes. So this cross susceptibility is the one that is probably driving it. Next slide, please. Now coming to the diabetes that is predominantly seen in the Japanese called fulminant diabetes. Next slide, please. It is diagnosed with certain special features. The destruction of the beta cells happens very rapidly. In this, the rapidity with which it happens, it might take 6 months, it might take 1 year for a type 1 diabetes. Here it takes 1 week. Since it happens so quickly, and all the insulin producing beta cells are destroyed in a matter of short time, almost all the children who develop diabetes end up in intensive care with coma. So the diabetic coma is the common presentation of these children, and you will not think it is diabetes. They are all admitted into the intensive care. They are all comatose, and when you check the blood glucose, it will be sky high. So if you look at the HbA1c values, it will tell you how long these people would have had the abnormality. And what is it that is there, which is predominantly in the Japanese population? Maximum number of fulminant diabetes is discovered in Japanese population. So there is something in that population that's triggering this. And we still haven't been able to find that out. Because if we find that out, we will have answers to so many other problems for diabetes in the rest of the world. So the diabetic ketoacidosis or diabetic ketosis around 7 days after the onset of hyperglycemia is a common presentation. The plasma glucose is really very high, more than 288 milligram per deciliter, and HbA1c is not very high. It is less than 8.5 on an average. So urinary C-peptide excretion is also low, and when you do other tests to look for a beta cell, they are completely gone. Next slide, please. So when you look at the pathological characteristics in fulminant diabetes, the damage happens so quickly. If you look at the beta cell destruction, in type 1 autoimmune diabetes mellitus, in the first column, there is extensive beta cell destruction, but it is not complete. Whereas in fulminant type 1 diabetes, beta cell destruction is complete. The C-peptide level is 0. But there is another cell called alpha cell which secretes glucagon adjacent to the beta cell. But in type 1 diabetes, alpha cell, nothing happens. Only the beta cells are destroyed. Whereas in fulminant diabetes, alpha cells are also destroyed. So there are clues by which you can really find out that this is fulminant diabetes, not type 1 diabetes. So that kind of a distinction is very important. The next slide, please. So when you look at the geographical distribution of these cases, the predominant cases were first reported in Japan, then of course in South Korea. Some cases have been reported in China, in Philippines, and some in Singapore as well. So this is something that is predominantly in the East and Southeast Asian population. And it became apparent if you know the problem, your diagnosis of fulminant diabetes is picked up. Assume you don't even know fulminant diabetes, you will all be calling them type 1 diabetes. All your registries are going to report these patients as type 1 diabetes and not fulminant diabetes. So the thing is that it is present elsewhere, but it is not picked up and it has been labeled wrongly so that you don't record it. So that is another explanation. Next slide, please. So when you look at the clinical characteristic, the duration is short. Of course, all of them have thirst. loss of body weight, but the loss of body weight is lesser than type 1 diabetes. They have flu-like symptoms. Okay, so there is probably a viral etiology, we do not know. And there are abdominal symptoms like nausea, vomiting, and things like that. That characterizes the clinical disease. Next slide, please. So some of the abnormal points are identified with the arrow in this particular slide. Next slide, please. So there are certain peculiar laboratory conditions. The plasma glucose is very high. The arterial pH is also it's more acidic. It's 7.1. Then of course there are variety of parameters in terms of pancreatic enzymes being high, which means there is certain element of pancreatic, exocrine pancreatic damage, not just endocrine pancreatic damage. So these are some of the hallmarks of the disease that many of the diabetic people or physicians need to know all these things. Only then they can make a right diagnosis. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Maturity onset diabetes of the young. So this is clearly a genetic disease, and this occurs predominantly in young individuals. And the defect is in a particular gene. So what those genes are, we will see. Next slide. So the diagnostic criteria for MODY is the early onset diabetes. It is not insulin dependent, but it has a genetic etiology which is autosomal dominant, and it is caused by single gene defect altering the beta cell function. Next slide, please. So the diagnosis of diabetes occurs before the age of 25 years, but you at least have 1 or 2 family members to have diabetes also. Next slide, please. Then they are off insulin treatment for measurable, and there are measurable C-peptide at least for 5 years after the diagnosis. So the C-peptide is not completely lost. Beta cells are not completely lost. And next slide, please. And must have diabetes in one parent. So this is some of the criteria that will help you diagnose. But the real identification of which gene effect is something that we can do only if you do a genetic analysis. So this genetic analysis will clearly tell what kind of MODY it is. So you have MODY 1, MODY 2, MODY 3, like that. So in this particular slide, you can see the transcription factors in the liver, or the important one, a genetic defect in these transcription factors lead to diabetes. But you also have an enzyme called glucokinase, which is very important conversion of glucose, and defect there is called as MODY2. And of course, there is some genes that we still do not know what it is, and it's called MODY-X. So it's a cluster of single gene disorders that are important glucose metabolism that lead to disease development in a younger age group. Next slide, please. So glucokinase and transcription factor diabetes rather than MODY. Here the glucokinase mutation, onset at birth, stable hyperglycemia, there is not much of upper or lower fluctuation. Diet treatment is what is preferred, and complications are rare, whereas transcription factor mutations, which are called as HNF1 alpha, HNF1 beta, like that, is little older, younger adult, progressive hyperglycemia, and the treatment for them could be 1/3 diet, 1/3 oral hypoglycemic agent, and 1/3 insulin. The complications are quite frequent in this particular group. Next slide, please. So if you look at the way you treat these patients, you realize that at certain point, if you introduce oral glycemic agents like the glibenclamide, the abnormality gets bigger. So glibenclamide is not the best treatment, or oral hypoglycemic agent is not the best treatment, whereas metformin, which is peripheral insulin sensitizer, is the important way to treat these patients. Next slide, please. Now, malnutrition modulated diabetes. This diabetes occurs predominantly in geographical areas above and below the equator. It was first detected in Kerala and then subsequently in Orissa, and also in Jamaica, Caribbean countries, Indonesia, like that. So it was called as J-type diabetes when it was discovered in Jamaica, and it was called malnutrition diabetes when it was discovered in Kerala. They had this association with one particular food item called topiaka. And Keralites need to have much greater consumption of topiaka. And topiaka, when it gets converted into the body, it seems that it produces cyanogenic compound, which is toxic to the beta cell. This is how they have related the etiology of this particular diabetes, called malnutrition modulated diabetes. So the onset can be anywhere between 7 to 30 years, and it is predominantly rural or poor economic status. The body mass index is really low. The diabetes is severe. But the interesting part is they will have 500, 600 blood glucose, but they'll never develop ketoacidosis. So there is something that is preventing them from becoming keto, whereas the same level of blood glucose in a type 1 diabetic, they'll end with a coma. So this is little peculiar, and type 1 diabetes with that particular blood glucose value will develop diabetic ketonuria and ketoacidosis, whereas no such thing happens in malnutrition diabetes. So this is little strange, and because these people have poor background, and for your glucose to get absorbed, you need to have adequate muscle mass. And if you take many of these poor people, many of them of course will be wearing dhotis, and if you ask them to fold their dhotis, their legs will be skinny. They'll be skin and bones. So the major problem there is insulin resistance, because they have some insulin, but it's not effectively acting. And for it to act, you need to have certain amount of muscle mass. So that's not happening here. So there is a relative insulin resistance. Next slide, please. So this is how some of these patients look like. They're skinny, and some patients, you have an abdominal paunch. That abdominal paunch is because of pancreatitis, where the external pancreas, the exocrine pancreas, not the endocrine pancreas, which constitutes alpha beta cells, but the exocrine pancreas, which constitute the pancreatic acinar cells that secretes the pancreatic juice, is the one that is affected. Next slide, please. So here, if you look at it, a difference between type 1 diabetes and malnutrition diabetes, the onset is gradual in malnutrition, C-peptide is slightly higher, the ketosis never happens, and insulin sensitivity is high in insulin dependent diabetes or type 1 diabetes. It's very low in the insulin resistance is very high. Now, of course, there is severe hypoglycemia and malnutrition diabetes with no ketosis, whereas it's the absolutely opposite in type 1 diabetes. Next slide, please. So the next group is called maternally inherited diabetes and deafness. Interestingly, this mitochondrial defect was first discovered at Karolinska Institute. And this was considered a major discovery. And one of my teachers called Rolf Luft, he passed away some years ago. It's, of course, Luft is a German name. Luft means in German air. Okay, that's why when you say the airline Lufthansa, it is flying in the air. So it was called Luft disease. You know, it's nothing to do with air or anything like that. It is just that there is a mitochondrial defect in this individual that was described by Rolf Luft. So it was discovered sometime in 1959. So then it became very popular in terms of new diabetes. So it's a mitochondrial disease. There is one genetic defect here, which is in the leucine part. And it's also called as DAD because it's considered as diabetes mellitus and deafness, occurs in younger individuals. So it has been mixed with so many other diseases. Of course, as I told you, for LADA, the names are given differently in different parts of the world, and you think they are all different diseases, but actually they are the same disease. Next slide, please. This is something when I teach students, they have never ever heard that diabetes can occur in children. So this is very important for us to know. Next slide, please. A neonatal diabetes mellitus, there is a continuous hyperglycemia before the age of 6 months. This is very strange. So what is the problem in these children? So it occurs very rarely, 1 in 300,000 or 1 in 500,000 newborns. There is a mutation. So beta cell is like a highly efficient factory, and it should receive signals from outside in order for insulin to get secreted. These signals coming from outside are mediated by something called potassium channel, calcium channel. So these channels are also regulated by certain gene. One particular gene is called KIR6.2, which causes mutation in the signaling, especially in the potassium channel. With the result, these children have permanent neonatal diabetes. The only way to find out is to do a genetic test. And if you see KIR6.2 mutated, then you know what it is. So how do you treat them? I'll come to that. But in many children, it is transient. Only 60% of the children, as they grow beyond one year of age, this becomes all right. So predominantly it is the insulin signaling that is defect, so that the insulin secretion to the glucose demand is not being sensed properly. Okay, that causes this disease. Next slide, please. So this is how it works. The glucose transporter that takes the glucose inside in order to stimulate the insulin secretion. But for that insulin secretion to happen, you have ATP sensitive potassium channel and calcium voltage dependent calcium channel. That is where there's a lot of electrical polarization, depolarization involved here, which itself can take one full lecture. So these mechanisms are all self-regulating, and this mechanism, if it becomes defective, you get this kind of diabetes. So sulfonylurea receptor, which is present on the surface of these beta cells, also becomes important. Next slide, please. This is about the type 2 diabetes in the young. As I told you, type 2 diabetes in the young never was heard of 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And it is the changes in our lifestyle that has brought this disease to the children. Now in Sweden, they have a childhood obesity clinic separately. So that is the number of children who are coming up with overweight and very poor physical activity. So obesity diabetes association, what is the different in Indian? So there has been extensive studies. If you take a thin Indian and a thin white man and compare the body deposits of fat, you might look thin. They will all be both normal body mass index, but the white man will have less body fat compared to the Asian. This is very strange. We seem to have a tendency to accumulate fat, which is probably genetically driven. So our cardiovascular integrity in terms of maintaining it is much more serious for us than, for instance, a white man. So this was documented by Chittaranjan Yajnik from Pune. Next slide, please. But this was a study that was done in southern Sweden called Malmo by a senior scientist called Leaf Group. And Leaf took a lot of type 2 LADA patients, which are adult onset autoimmune diabetes patients. When he looked for genes of type 2 diabetes, he was able to find type 2 diabetes genes in LADA patients. So he was trying to say that LADA is a separate disease. That's a mixture of type 1 and type 2. And he was the first one to say that, because one of the genes that is defective is the gene called, it's called TCF7L2, which is an important gene for type 2 diabetes. So this is something that he showed. So we are still in the process of understanding what diabetes is. But when you look at the treatment options, when you see the variety of diabetes that I just described, the next slide, please. What you see is type 1 diabetes, insulin is the drug of choice. Whereas if you take fulminant diabetes, insulin is the drug of choice. Whereas if you take LADA patients, you can give insulin. There is also an oral group called sitagliptin that has been found to be effective. But sulfonylurea, like glibenclamide or glipizide, is completely contraindicated. You should never ever give it. Whereas if you take malnutrition modulated diabetes, you can give insulin. You can also give metformin, not sulfonylurea. Whereas if you take MODY, especially MODY 1 and MODY 3, sulfonylurea is the drug of choice. Whereas MODY 5, insulin is the drug of choice. If you mix this up, you are maltreating the patient. Whereas neonatal diabetes, sulfonylurea you should give. So if you have a 6-month-old baby with diabetes, you should not think tablet will do wonders. Insulin will, sulfonylurea will do wonders, not insulin. The tendency to give is to give insulin. And the same thing goes for mitochondrial diabetes, where sulfonylurea is the drug of choice. Of course, in type 2 diabetes in the young, there is certain level of overweight and obesity. Metformin is the drug of choice. And on top of metformin, it's possible to add insulin. But metformin enough will tell you that the treatment is very good. So if you have somebody with diabetes coming to you in the age group of 25 to 30, you are in big trouble if you are a doctor. So it becomes very hard for you to identify what exactly the problem is. Because if you look at the treatment choices, for whatever the real etiology is, the treatment choices differ. So it becomes very important that you make the right diagnosis. So this is where what we call it as precision medicine comes into the picture. And if you start treating patients for their hyperglycemia, by giving insulin. Oh, 200, give 5 rows extra. 300 blood glucose, add another 10 units of insulin. That's not going to work. So first, you must be aware that there are so many types of diabetes. Second, each type of diabetes responds to different drugs much more efficiently. Third, it's extremely important that we make the right diagnosis, and the tools for making the right diagnosis are available. But this knowledge should be available amongst the physicians who treat the patients with diabetes. Next slide, please. So with this, I end my presentation. If any of you, if you cannot ask me questions, you're most welcome to write to me. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. Sai Ram.